نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإن تعدوا نعمة الله لا تحصوها صدق الله العظيم صلى الله على النبي الأمي وآله صلى الله عليه وسلم صلاة وسلام عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم. All praises due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our cherisher, our sustainer, and choices of durood and salam be upon his beloved, our master, arwahuna fida, Sayyidina Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. Hazrat Sayyidina Abu Sa'id Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala an, he narrates a beautiful hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam with regard to the excellences and the rewards that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showers upon us during this blessed month of Ramadan. And there are many narrations with regard to the rewards that one receives in the month of Ramadan. But this particular hadith reminds us of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showers His bounties, showers His ni'mats and His mercies upon us for the little actions that we do. Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam mentioned that on the first night of Ramadan, the portals of the skies and the heavens, they are opened, and they remain open until the last day of Ramadan. Then Huzur alayhi salam mentioned that if anyone performs salah during this month, for every sajda, for every prostration that he makes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless that person with 1,500 virtues. Subhanallah. Not for the salah, just for the prostration in the salah. The person will receive 1,500 virtues, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant that person a palace made of red rubies in Jannah. And this palace will have 60,000 gates. Subhanallah. We cannot even imagine how vast this mansion, this palace will be in Jannah. That's just specifically a reward for reciting your salah, performing your salah in Ramadan. That this palace will have 60,000 gates. And Huzur alayhi salam mentions that each of these gates will have hinges made of gold, that will have embroidery made of red rubies. Subhanallah. Even the description of that is beyond our imagination. Allahu Akbar. And then Huzur alayhi salam mentions that the person who fasts on the first of Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives his sins for the rest of Ramadan till the last day. Subhanallah. And then he says that 70,000 angels will seek forgiveness on behalf of that person from morning till evening. Subhanallah. Look at how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us and showers His mercies upon us just because of the month of Ramadan. And then he further goes on to say that if anyone performs sajda, prostration, whether during the day or during the night in this month, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant that person a tree in Jannah which is so huge that a horse rider can ride in its shadow for 500 years. Subhanallah. This is for one sajda. So now from this narration, if we just focus on the reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us for making one prostration, one sajda in this month, we get 1,500 virtues, and we get a tree planted in Jannah for us that is so huge that a horse rider can ride under its shadow for 500 years. Allahu Akbar. Now we cannot even imagine how vast this tree is, that its shadow is so big that a horse rider can ride for 500 years under its shadow. Now for us to understand and to contemplate how vast is the mercy and the ni'mas of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let us try to quantify just in terms of the reward that one receives for one sajda throughout this month. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. if you have to count the ni'mats and the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will be unable to enumerate them. Now just for us to, in our minds, to get a grasp of how vast is the ni'mats and the mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just for us to count in terms of the reward for a sajda. Now, we all know in terms of our 5 daily salah, there are a total of 48 rakats, including our faraid, our sunnah and our nafil. That's 48 rakats each day. And then if you add the 20 rakats of Tarawih salah, that will give you 68. So that's a total of 68 rakats that we perform in one day. Now if you multiply that by 2, because in each rakat you make 2 sajdas, that's a total of 136 prostrations per day that we make when we perform our 5 daily salah and we perform our Tarawih. 136 sajdas we make, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He gives us 1 tree for each sajda that we make. So per day it's 136 sajdas, and for the entire month of Ramadan, a total of 30 days, that's 4,080 trees that get planted for us in Jannah that are so vast that you can travel under that for 500 years. Subhanallah. Imagine more than 4,000 trees are planted in Jannah for us, just for each person, just in terms of the sajdas that you performed in the month of Ramadan. This excludes the reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you for reciting the tilawat, reciting the Holy Quran, for your wazaif, for reciting the rest of your salah, for the ruku that you make, for the qiyam that you make. Everything else is a separate reward. This is just one reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us for making sajda in the holy month of Ramadan. And imagine how blessed are we that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted us the greatest ni'mat, the greatest bounty, and that is the ni'mat of iman. This ni'mat we cannot, even if we live 1,000 lifetimes and spend every moment of those lifetimes making shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will still be insufficient for us to truly appreciate this one ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the fact that we are able to take advantage of these mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us iman. Even the kuffar, they are also living in this time of the Ramadan. They are also around, they are also conducting their lives, but they don't receive the blessing that we receive as Muslims. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give them the tawfiq of iman. So this is such a great ni'mat that we have received, that we received iman, and through the blessings of iman we are able to open the gateway to all of the ni'mats of Ramadan. And this is one example that Huzur alayhi salam mentions, that when we enumerate it, when we count it, then we realize how little we understand about the ni'mats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just to give you an example, it is mentioned in the hadith that in one of the previous ummahs, there lived a pious person. And this pious person, he went into the middle of the ocean, he found an island, and he found a high peak on that island, and he went and sat there and he started making ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he continued to make ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided for him a pomegranate tree and a sweet water spring. When he was hungry, he used to eat the pomegranates. When he was thirsty, he used to drink from the fountain. And he continued to make ibadat, and this island was so isolated that no other insan could reach that place. So he was completely isolated, and because he had no company, he had no means of committing guna. Because when you have company, then you have somebody to lie to, then you have somebody to backbite about, then you have somebody that will distract you from the ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is company that leads a person to sin. He had no company. So he sat alone and made ibadat for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a total of 400 years. Allahu Akbar. Imagine, his nama-e-amal has 400 years of ibadat and not a single sin. And Huzur alayhi salam mentioned that when this person's time came to leave this dunya, Sayyidina Israel alayhi salam, the angel of death, when he came to him to take his soul out, This person said to him, give me a moment, I just want to make wudu and recite 2 rakats of nafil salah. And when I recite the second sajda, when I'm in the position of the second sajda of the second rakat, then you must take my soul out. And this person was so pious, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knew that he was going to make this request. So Sayyidina Israel alayhi salam says, don't worry, I came with that amount of time for you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he allowed him to go and make wuzu. He recited his 2 rakats, and in the second sajda of the second rakat, Sayyidina Israel alayhi salam took his soul out. And it is mentioned that up until today, until the day of Qiyamah, that person's body will still be in that position of sajda on that island as it is, at the time that it was, at the time that his soul was removed. And Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam once came to Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam and said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, whenever we ascend and descend from the skies, we see this position on that island still in that position of sajda. Subhanallah. Even Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam sees his body in that position when his soul was taken out. So this can make you understand the maqam that this person received. And Huzur alayhi salam mentions that on the day of judgment, this person will be brought before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his nama amal will have 400 years of good deeds and no sin. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the command to the angels, O my angels, idhabu bi'abdi ila jannati bi rahmati. Take my servant to Jannah with my mercy. So this person will reply, he would say, not with your mercy, through my actions. Allahu Akbar. Why? Because he thought to himself that 400 years of ibadat I made, I am haqdar, I deserve Jannah. So when he says this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the command to the angels, bring him back here. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, bring him to the mizan, to the scale of justice, and put his 400 years of ibadat on one side, and put one ni'mat, one bounty I gave him on the other side. What ni'mat? One eye of his. Not even both eyes, just one eye of his. And when the angels weigh this, that one eye will far supersede that 400 years of ibadat that he performed. Allahu Akbar. Imagine how little we understand about the qadr, the magnitude of the virtues, of the ni'mats that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted to us, that we don't appreciate. 400 years of ibadat he made without a single sin. And it is not sufficient to appreciate and make shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only for one eye. We don't live for 400 years. We don't even live a quarter of that time. And most of our lives we spend in guna, in sin. How will we be able to truly make shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his ni'mats? So we can understand from this narration how much worth the ni'mats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold. And when this happens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then gives the command to the angels, idhabu bi'abdi ila nari bi'adli. Take my servant to my Jahannam through my adl, through my justice. Why? Because no one will enter into Jannah through their deeds. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to deal with us justly, we will not enter into Jannah. Allah forbid. This is why we always make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to deal with us justly on the Maidan of Mahshar, but to deal with us with His mercy. Because our deeds, our good deeds are worthless before all of the ni'mas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted to us. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this command, this person will immediately seek the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seek forgiveness and say, no, not through my deeds, O Allah, it is through your mercy that I will enter into Jannah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again says to the angels, idhabu bi'abdi ila jannati bi rahmati. Take the servant of mine to my Jannah through my mercy. Now imagine, we cannot understand the qadr, the worth of one ayat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. What will we understand the worth of this entire month of Ramadan, about which Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala wasallam mentioned that if the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly understood what Ramadan holds, he would wish that the entire year was Ramadan. Subhanallah. So we don't understand what Ramadan holds. We don't understand the total blessings. Yes, we have a glimpse from the various narrations of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam, but we don't truly understand what this month holds. And this is why we need to maximize the ibadat, maximize the prostration that you can make. Try to wake up for tahajjud, try to wake up a little before sehri, a little after sehri if you have time. Try to recite tahajjud as well. Why? Because the more you perform salah, the more sajdas you make. We have heard how much of blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a person just for making sajda. And whatever ibadat we can make, whatever you can manage, try to maximize your ibadat in this month, because this is a month that we don't know whether we will get again. We don't know whether we will get another opportunity to make another sajda after this Ramadan. So treat this Ramadan as if it is your last Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the tawfiq and the hidayat to truly love Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, and to truly respect and honor this month of Ramadan and maximize every moment that we have. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المؤمنين والمؤمنات إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. جزاكم الله.